Hello, my name's Andy. Today I will be explaining how to demonstrate that a policy will be done well in debating. So you might be thinking, what does this even mean? This isn't an argument. This isn't a full piece of analysis. I'll explain what I mean. So, in a lot of debates, you'll be asked to defend a policy or to explain why a policy would be good if we implemented it in the world. In some of those motions, the wording will be this house would, or it'll be this house believes that X should do Y. So this house would legalize all drugs. This house would make voting mandatory, etc. Or this house believes that Donald Trump should declare a invasion of Greenland. Maybe by the time I put this video up, it will have already happened. Things like this. In those debates, you're able to put forward a model or some sort of explanation of how this policy would be implemented. So when we make voting mandatory, we would make it so that everybody has to show up to the polls, or else they can be fined. They can appeal for exemptions preemptively if they have something especially pressing. We can hold it on a day where it's very straightforward for people to vote, so we can put it on weekends instead of having it clashing people's primary working days, whatever. That's all fine. But there's also a set of debates where you're not able to have the magic of fiat. So you're not able to just stand up and say from the pulpit as opening government, this is how the policy will be done. Instead, how the policy will look is a matter of contestation within the debate. So something like this house supports mandatory voting, or this house supports an invasion of Greenland by the United States requires you to explain how you think that invasion would happen, how that implementation of a voting system would occur. And this is a set of motions like this House opposes a policy being put into place, this House supports a policy being put into place, this House believes that it would be good if this policy was put into place, etc., etc. I have some examples here. In these debates, often it will become a central issue then, in terms of who wins the round, as to who is able to dominate the narrative of how the policy will be done. So, for example, if the adoption of a Pan-African common currency was done in an effective way, where it was gradually implemented, where it had buy-in from a large number of member states, where it was a strong currency that was backed by effective reserves that could be floated in international markets, or maybe pegged to a large international currency, that might be a good thing. Or if it's done in a haphazard and corrupt way, where countries are vying to fight over which one is going to claim dominance, and potentially it leads to it being controlled by powerful actors with incentives to screw over other states within that union, which leads to things like poor exports for the rest of the bloc, which comparatively makes one of the countries richer or whatever. I'm making it up off the top of my head, but you can see how those produce two very different sets of arguments about whether or not we would support or oppose the policy. What this means is the framing in these rounds is often one of the biggest areas in which a team can win or lose the debate. Too often, what happens in these rounds is that a proposition team stands up and says the policy would likely be done like this. They don't give any reasons, and they just give a bunch of really nice, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if it worked this way? And opposition stand up and they give a bunch of really terrible doom and gloom rhetoric about how the policy might be done. But neither of them actually explain which one of their policy manifestations is likelier to occur and which one occurs in a greater number of instances. With that said, the judge is kind of left a little bit confused, and then a wonderful team stands up in the back half and they give a bunch of reasons for why the policy is likely to be done in the good way that their opening explained, or why it's likely to be done in the bad way that their opening explained. And as a consequence, the judge is able to say, look, the top half teams disagreed on which policy manifestation was likelier. The closing team explains that it will be done in a good, effective, appropriate manner, and consequently, the impacts that exist within the proposition's frame on this motion, assuming the proposition is supporting the policy, are the most pressing in the round. They're only made pressing, or they're made much more pressing by the contribution from the closing team, who says that it will be done well, and consequently, closing government wins the debate, just to give one example. With that said, that kind of foregrounds some of the applications of this argument. It's in this House supports, this House believes, or this House opposes motions where a policy is being enacted, which may be good or bad. A closing team can stand up and break a characterization deadlock. In more simple terms, they can give a straightforward answer to which picture of the world is more realistic and thus win the debate. Or it can also be a very useful thing to do in the top half of the debate to, firstly, make your case more resistant to response. Because if you have a bunch of reasons why the policy will be done effectively, then the opposition side stands up and starts listing off a bunch of doom and gloom effects that will occur if the policy is implemented. Then it's very easy for your deputy speaker to just stand up and say, well, hold on a second, we already explained why this is not going to be done in the silly way that the opposition describes. Consequently, their arguments are unrealistic, and that places a very big burden on them to fight back. and things like this. It also prevents you from having your closing team do what I just described, which is standing up and listing a bunch of reasons for why your policy will be done well, and then claiming credit for all of your arguments and beating you on scale, or beating you because they access your impact better, or whatever other piece of weighing you might want to use. So, with that out of the way, there are two caveats I want to bring quickly here. The first is you must adapt the analysis to the specific debate you're in. And I've said that for all of the different stock arguments so far, but this is probably the most important instance. Doing a invasion of Greenland well looks very differently to doing a common currency in the African Union well, or doing the rollout of a certain sports procedure where fans can vote on what sporting rule changes they want over time, which was a motion at Trinity IV a couple of years ago, or Trinity Open actually. Or for example, supporting things like mandatory voting, supporting things like the legalization of drugs. Vastly different explanations are required for the manner in which the policies are done well. Don't just list off by rote verbatim the reasons I'm about to give you here. Make sure that if they don't apply to the debate, don't use them. If they do apply, use them. And even if they do apply, tailor them. The second thing you should have in mind is that you should only run this argument when it's strategic, i.e., if in the round, for example, the motion is something about this House supports mineral-rich countries extracting their own resources or building their own resource extraction industries, as opposed to seeking investment from Western MNCs, which was kind of the inverse of the Euros Round 5 motion from 2024. If opening government stand up and they say this is going to be done well for 8 different reasons, and then opening opposition say, yeah, sure, it'll be done well, but even if it's done well, it's still better to get in international companies for a variety of other reasons. It doesn't make sense for a closing team to stand up and say, here's more reasons why it'll be done well. Or let's just say that the opening team is given no reasons for why the extraction is going to be done well from domestic producers. And opening opposition just never contests it, and they give a bunch of reasons for why, even if it's done well, it's still better to go with MNCs. Well, then, what's the point in standing up and explaining why it'll be done well in closing? Nobody disagrees on this. You're just wasting your breath. You're not helping your side win the debate. So the crucial thing here is only make this argument when it is controversial whether or not the policy will be done in a good way. Also, that kind of ties into one last thought that I didn't mention previously, which is that often closing teams have to spend more time analyzing this argument than opening teams, because if you're a prime minister in a debate or a leader of opposition and you spend 5 minutes explaining why the policy will be done well and 2 minutes explaining why you should actually do it in the first place, but then your opponent doesn't actually contest that aspect of the debate, you've just wasted 5 minutes of your time. If they stand up, for instance, and say, yeah, look, you're going to do a very good job invading Greenland, but that's a terrible idea. You still shouldn't do it for a bunch of fairly straightforward reasons, then you're not going to win that comparison based on the analysis you gave. So, firstly, it's very risky to spend a lot of time on it in top half. Secondly, you can often get away with spending less time on it in top half. So, for instance, if you only give a couple reasons for why this will be done appropriately, it's going to be difficult for your closing team to stand up and give the other half of the reasons for why it'll be done appropriately and then beat you on that. It'll be a hard weighing picture to sell to the judge. So with that in mind, do it in more detail in back half and top half. Okay, a lot of burying the lead. Let's get into how do you actually make this argument. And there's only 3 steps. It's very straightforward. And the first, beyond giving a thesis statement that this policy will be executed in an effective and appropriate manner, always have a thesis statement so your judge knows what you're going to argue. Your first step of the argument is probably the most important. In fact, I'd say hands down the most important. You need to characterize what it means for a policy to be done well or done poorly. So, for example, in the motion I mentioned from the Trinity Open just another minute or two ago about how fans will vote on what changes they want in the rules of sporting organizations on regular bases or intervals. If you can't explain what those changes will actually look like, or what these fans actually look like, or how their voting habits might appear in an ideal scenario, then you just saying it'll be done well because of 5 incentive reasons and 5 capacity reasons means nothing to the judge. They'll literally just be taking down thinking, what are you trying to prove to me? If you can stand up at the beginning, however, and say fans will want to implement rules to make the speed of these games faster so that they can get greater entertainment. They'll also want to make them shorter so they can balance the considerations of not injuring their star players. They will broadly form coalitions around this in terms of that are marshaled through things like mainstream media, through pundits and ex-players who tend to have disproportionate sway. They will vote in this not every single season because that would be too disruptive. They'll probably do it fairly regularly, maybe once every 5 years, and there'll be monitoring periods using trial and error and data to see what engagement metrics are touched by this, to what degree are there spikes in things like injuries which take athletes out of the game, to what extent are there disparities in the way that leagues are played. So, for example, if a change in the rules leads to one team losing, or one team winning every single season, then other fans will clump against it. You see what I've done there? I've just given a bunch of kind of examples of how this might actually look. And then you can go into explaining what it actually means. So, firstly, you just have to illustrate what does the policy look like if it's done well? Give me three examples. Who is doing this policy? What is the time frame for this policy? Just give me examples. That's what you got to do. If you don't do that, then you've clearly shown you don't really understand the policy in the first place, and that's okay. Look, I don't know much about nuclearization in South Korea. Like, I wouldn't be able to give you a million examples, but you know what? I watched Chernobyl and I could extrapolate it. So that's a way of thinking. Just visualize it from different pieces of, I guess, imagery or stories or things you know about the world and try to make it as realistic as possible as to what a good version of the policy would be. Don't just say it'll be done well. It's lazy. It won't be bought. Second thing, preempt the trade-off in the debate. So discuss what the opposing side may characterize the policy as looking like. So, for example, in the motion I previously mentioned about extraction of resources using domestic um, mineral extraction companies as opposed to MNCs, there might be a section where you explain, look, we think this is going to be done effectively, where we are able to keep the profits inside of our own countries, where we're able to boost employment through having domestic industries being grown. They're able to have vertical integration at various levels of the supply chain so that we can grow things like tertiary sectors. But there might be a variety of instances in which this isn't true. So maybe in 5 to 10% of cases, you're going to have really corrupt narco states that are not going to be able to run their companies effectively, or you're going to have massive collapses and bankruptcies where you don't have the startup capital. But we think that's a really, really small part of the debate. You see what I've just done there? A trade-off where you say, look, there'll be a certain set of cases where the opposing side's doom and gloom vision of the policy will happen. That's fine. We'll bite the bullet. In the vast majority of instances, it will look like what we're describing. And also, we're happy to stand by the benefits of what we're pushing for, even if we have to take on the harms in those instances. Maybe give a couple of reasons for that. Maybe it's that MNCs, even in their best case, are still really destructive for these economies. They still lead to narco leaders getting a massive amount of disproportionate sway because the MNCs have direct deals between themselves, like the CEOs, and also the heads of countries, and they move in their own workers rather than creating jobs in the first instance. That's just a piece of stock analysis. You can watch the debate in round 5 of Euros to get a little bit more. But what you should bear in mind here is that there will be some cases where the best case of your side's not true. Just make sure you weigh them out and do the little scam where you say that it's a vast minority of cases, or a tiny minority, I guess. With that said, you've done the most important step, which is just explaining what this actually means, like what this looks like. Now, let's get into what are the incentives for this policy to be done well. Because if you can explain that the people enacting the policy have reasons to want to do it well, and also they have, I guess, the capacity or they have the ability to do it well, then you're probably going to have it being done well. So, what are the reasons why they want to, and what are the reasons why they can? So, on the reasons why you'd want to do a policy well, why you'd want to do the resource extraction in an effective way, which helps out your population, why you'd want to do the sports replacement thing in a manner, the replacement of the rules in a way which makes the game more fun and safe for everybody, stuff like that. The first thing is the classic mechanism, the all-time break glass, pull it out reason, media scrutiny. You say here the media outlets have an incentive to spot mistakes in the policy so they can report it to maximize clicks and profits. Moreover, many journalists care about the public interest and will scrutinize shortcomings for public information. This pressure is both personally motivating and inspiring for check and balance mechanisms against poor policy, which can bring scandal upon an organization. A second reason you can give is just avoidance of backlash, another stock argument in the series, where you say that if the policy is going to be implemented poorly, and those harmed will call out the architects in an immiserating manner, which will leave these people subject to departmental cuts, to withdrawn bonuses, to reduced prospects for future employment, to reputational damage, as well as the moral culpability of witnessing the suffering and societal disunity sowed by your hands. That's a bit melodramatic. I think you need to explain why this actually leads to, like, why the call out and scrutiny actually leads to people feeling it in their own pocket or feeling it in their own gut. But you can do that depending on the policy. So if you really screwed up an invasion, for example, and it led to a bunch of body bags being sent home of American soldiers, which are then you're dragged out in front of the news and being forced to justify this, you're probably going to get sacked, something like this. Or maybe you will, maybe you won't. That's a real world discussion for another day. But in a debate, you could probably make that characterization. A third reason you could give is there are passionate people involved in this, and so they have an incentive to get things right. That the people working for the actor have an enormous sunk cost in this field. Many of them are empathetic due to regular exposure to those affected by the problem they're attempting to solve. That moreover, given the skill set of these people, they could have gotten another job in a higher paying industry, but they have chosen to work to improve the lives of those around them. Hence, they are willing to research, so they make fewer mistakes preemptively, and also learn from their mistakes and try as hard as they can to not make more into the future. A fourth reason you could give here are profits. And if this sounds like the inverse of backlash, it's because it is. You say that if the policy is done well, the architects behind it will profit from a boost in their reputation, better job prospects in the future, bonuses, self-esteem boosts, the enrichment of their community more generally, and the securing of their legacy. A fifth reason you could give is precedence, which is that the actor has done similar policies well before. They may have also opted for a general underlying philosophy for other policies, revealing their preference for both rigor and also competence, as well as the values that our side asserts that they hold. Something along those lines. It's a pretty easy sell. If they've done it well before, they'll probably do it well again. Unless the op comes up with some great reasons for why they've changed since then. Another thing is competition, which is that you say that if the actor fails to execute the policy well, someone else will do so. And this motivates the actor to be seen as competent. For instance, if a political party botches the policy, they may fail to win re-election. If a company messes this up, then their other consumers or their other competitors going to hoover up consumers and beat them out in the market, leading to their profits decreasing, not fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities. A final reason you can give on incentive, and one of the great scam reasons of all time, and I believe it's from, I heard it first from Tin, I heard it again in a workshop afterwards, is a justification reason, which is that given that the status quo bias is strong within most people, in order to clear the bar for a change being acceptable, it has to be very good. Hence, there is a consistent pressure on policymakers to justify their policy's usefulness. Moreover, they only would have opted into constructing the policy in the first place if they at least believed that it was somewhat plausible. And since you've established that the bar for believing in the policy is quite high, it means you must believe that it's a very good policy. So there's a reveal preference for opting into these instances for the people who get involved with it, and you want to justify to your electorate that it was worth the cost. That's a bunch of reasons why you might want to do a policy well. Now, why might you be able to do a policy well? If you can act upon your previously mentioned incentives, the policy will turn out well. Firstly, information. Whether it be through lowering barriers to accessing information over the internet, making it cheaper to conduct surveys, interviews, and research pre-existing data, or the abundance of direct feedback mechanisms for the policy which you can learn from, or access to data about prior attempts to implement similar policies, information is more plentiful than ever, and policymakers can learn from data analysis and tailor their policy to be as statistically useful as possible. A second reason you can give is funding. Funding makes the world go round in many instances. You just say that you have enough money to afford implementing the policy, whether it's through loans, domestic, international, profits, tax revenue, grants, subsidies, donations, foreign direct investment, accumulated savings, whatever it may be, this policy will be funded. A third thing you can say is just human capital, which is that you have the capacity to onboard high quality human capital, which are highly educated people from a diverse array of backgrounds paired with experienced, passionate workers with institutional knowledge, with a full access to information and competitive salaries. I almost laugh reading it out loud. It's so cliche. It's just a mix of all the debating buzzwords, but enormously effective within rounds in many instances, something which you can tailor to the debate that you're in to make it maybe sound more realistic. So, for example, if you're talking about I don't know, a very corrupt government or corporation implementing a policy, you're probably not going to be able to make this reason, or at least you'll have to adapt it to some degree. Maybe focus more on the passion, which means that people work for a low amount of money, which means that they'll volunteer their time. So that means you have the capacity to onboard them, things like this, rather than talking about their competitive salaries, their institutional knowledge, and whatnot. A fourth thing you might want to point out is that there is external cohesion with this policy. And this is that actors outside of the motion are eager to see the policy work, and that the public will view this policy well, meaning that businesses are willing to lobby for its existence and international actors will provide money and advice to ensure that it works. The immediate benefits of this policy will draw bipartisan support, leading to its ossification, its reification, and indeed its instantiation within law going forward. Don't say it like that. Right. Yeah, I've put up the reason there. That's cool. All right. Finally, trial and error, my favorite mechanism. Here you say that even if the policy is done badly in its early iterations, or it's not perfect, that performance reviews will reveal its issues, and you can trial run the policy in smaller contexts before rolling it out universally, meaning that the policy can be tweaked until it provides optimal outcomes for most people. A great example of this was the motion about implementing the voting mechanism for people, like allowing people to vote on their sports rule changes. A great example of trial and error is running the rule at a lower level of the game. So running it in schools level or running it in under 18s level and then rolling it up to a top level to see what are the benefits, what are the downsides. I'm a big rugby union fan, and that's a game where they tend to do this quite frequently. With that said, I've given you a bunch of reasons why well, you have to explain what the policy is. You need to show why people want to do it well, and you have to show why they're able to do it well. And when you've done that, you've done the job. You might be wondering, where's the response section? Where's the bit where you explain the flips of all of these bits? I usually have a section on rebuttal. Here, I'm not going to do that, but instead, I'm going to release a video in a couple of days' time explaining how to show that a policy will be done poorly so that you can run it on the other side of the house. And you might be wondering what happens when somebody runs done well and done poorly in the same debate. We just chuck all the mechanisms and hope that the judge arrives at an answer. Yeah, it's probably down to what's better illustrated, maybe down to who had a bit more pep in their step. Who knows these days? Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.